As he continued to stare, I wanted to point to my cheek and remind him. But you were the one who wanted this, remember? You are the one who asked, and I repeat, why not fix your face? I recall reading these lines from Justina Chen's North of Beautiful when I was in middle school. I hoped at the end of the book Tara Cooper would decide to fix her face, which was blotted with a port wine stain. As a preteen, I acted precisely like many other characters in the novel, wishing that Cooper would complete herself and fulfill her beauty potential. I remember thinking, she's tall, blonde, and has blue eyes. She just needs to fix her face and she will be unstoppable. As I progressed through the book, I realized that this was not going to happen. And thus, at the end, I remember feeling underwhelmed. I kept the book beside my bed on a small wooden side table, growing increasingly frustrated with the author, with myself, and with Tara Cooper. Although it would seem like this is a standalone tale that is only stored in a memory fragment, this is not the case. I firmly believed, and occasionally find myself repeating still, that while desirable for men as well, beauty is the ultimate goal for women. Justina Chen said this about her book in an interview to Sensations. As a woman, writer, and mother, I have wanted to tackle our society's super narrow definition of beauty. You know, a friend just mentioned Kate Winslet's weight loss and how sad it was since she looked like any other starlet now. It's true, but how do you translate that sentiment into a novel? I wasn't sure what my entry point would or should be. It wasn't until I was telling an acquaintance of mine what a great mothering job she was doing with her son, Mr. Cool and Popular at school, who was also born with a port wine stain on his cheek. She stopped me mid-accolade and said, "That's because he's a boy." With that one comment, the story was born, and Tara sprang to life in my imagination, like Athena from Zeus. As a child, I would find my mother praying to God for her daughters, us, to be beautiful, among other things. And as a child with a less than ideal complexion, I was urged to use cosmetics to make myself fairer and more attractive. I was suggested numerous home remedies that would lighten my complexion a few shades, and it was instilled in me from childhood to adolescence that other achievements meant a great deal more if I was pretty while accomplishing them. It is therefore not difficult to understand why my life is still governed by all of this societal conditioning. It can be difficult to ignore this when you look in the mirror and are reminded of the flaws that have been pointed out as you apply concealer after concealer and creams after creams in an effort to achieve a standard of perfection set by our families, social media, and other factors. However, it may be a common occurrence for us to fall short and never achieve the level we wish to achieve, no matter how much effort we put forth. All of this compelled me to consider the category of beauty and the beautiful, as well as the perfect woman, as an archetype. We will begin our investigation of beauty by looking at it historically, then coming closer to the present. We will try to figure out how beauty was created and preserved, and how those standards changed or stayed the same across time. This will be a deep dive with examples drawn from popular culture, social media trends, and books, among other things. Before we dig into the politics of beauty and its close associates, desire and love, let us take one more lasting look in the mirror before we attempt to break it piece by piece. What is beauty? Many people have argued that beauty is a combination of qualities such as shape, color, or form that pleases the aesthetic senses, especially the sight. We see that throughout history, various theories and philosophical perspectives have emerged to explain the concept of beauty. Beauty is thought of as a complex and often subjective notion, although we do have many thinkers who argue that there is something inherently objective about our understanding of beauty. So, before we begin our dive into how beauty has been conceptualized in popular culture, I will begin with some of the key theories on beauty. Let us begin with the Platonic theory of beauty. This was proposed by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, and this theory suggests that beauty is not a mere physical attribute, but also an abstract and an ideal form that exists beyond the material world. According to Plato, physical beauty is a reflection of a higher, eternal beauty that can only be grasped through contemplation and reason. Then we move on to the Aristotelian theory of virtue in aesthetics. As we all know, Aristotle was another Greek philosopher who worked under Plato, and he sort of linked beauty to the concept of virtue. He argued that a beautiful object or person embodies a harmonious balance of qualities, and the experience of beauty leads to moral and intellectual growth. Another theory was related to hedonism. The hedonistic theory of beauty posits that beauty is purely a matter of pleasure and sensory delight. It suggests that people perceive something as beautiful when it brings them pleasure and evokes positive emotions. Along with these theories, there were many others that were proposed through time. I will mention some of them really quickly. So there was the evolutionary aesthetic, which was based on evolutionary biology, and this theory suggested that perceptions of beauty are rooted in evolutionary adaptations. So, certain features and characteristics are considered beautiful because they indicate health, fertility, or genetic fitness. Another theory that we come across was termed the cognitive theory of beauty. And these theories sort of emphasize the cognitive processes involved in perceiving beauty. They suggested that beauty is associated with concepts such as symmetry, proportion, and balance, which are processed and recognized by the human mind. We have now sort of moved towards various other different theories of beauty, which also include the cultural relativism. So this theory highlights the cultural and social influences on beauty standards, and it posits that beauty is not universal but varies across different cultures and historical periods, and it's shaped primarily by these cultural norms, values, and aesthetics. Finally, there are postmodern and deconstructionist theories. And when I say finally, I do not mean that there are no other theories of beauty, but this is where we shall stop in our analysis of theories. So the postmodern and deconstructionist theories challenge traditional notions of beauty and propose that beauty is a historically constructed concept with no fixed meaning. They emphasize the diversity and fluidity of beauty, questioning the established beauty ideals. Now, given the different theories that have been proposed to approach beauty across space and time, our focus in this essay will be primarily on how these theories are related to women and how these various ideas continue to have a lasting impact on the self-image and the self-esteem of many women across the world. Beauty, women's business in society, is the theatre of their enslavement. Only one standard of female beauty is sanctioned, the girl. The great advantage men have is that our culture allows two standards of male beauty, the boy and the man. The beauty of a boy resembles the beauty of a girl. In both sexes, it's a fragile kind of beauty and flourishes naturally only in the early part of the life cycle. Happily, men are able to accept themselves under another standard of good looks, heavier, rougher, more thickly built. A man does not grieve when he loses the smooth, unlined, hairless skin of a boy, for he has only exchanged one form of attractiveness for another. The darker skin of a man's face, roughened by daily shaving, showing the marks of emotion and the normal lines of age. There is no equivalent of this second standard for women. The single standard of beauty for women dictates that they must go on having clear skin. Every wrinkle, every line, every gray hair is a defeat. No wonder that no boy minds becoming a man. This is what Susan Sontag says about aging and women. This is reinforced by the representation of women in the media and in publications. Their descriptions set a standard of beauty for women to strive for. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov is one example that comes to mind. Despite the fact that Nabokov wrote this book as a criticism on the sexualization of young girls, the media representation of Lolita is the opposite. The little girl is bestowed with power over everyone around her. She is supposed to have influence over others, and everything happens to her is because she willed it. Lolita popularized the nymphant aesthetic. The nymphant aesthetic is a harmful cultural style that romanticizes and sexualizes young girls. It objectifies young girls, reducing their value to simple objects of desire, and can lead to young girls' media exploitation. The nymphant aesthetic can have real-world effects, potentially influencing detrimental actions and attitudes through distorting healthy relationships and developing a toxic image of adult-child dynamics. Young girl and consumerism. I felt like I started to observe myself more once I moved to a new country for my master's degree. Rough skin, acne on my legs, and hyperpigmentation. Before, I was never concerned by these things. I've always had acne-prone skin, and my face was what bothered me the most. However, moving to this new country was making me feel increasingly self-conscious about my body. I never saw myself as a whole, always in pieces. I wasn't a complete person. I was only my limbs, legs, arms, my face, my stomach, my chest. This brought to mind something Susan Sontag said. Women are taught to see their bodies in parts and evaluate each part separately. Breasts, feet, hips, waistline, neck, eyes, nose, complexion, hair, and so on. Each, in turn, is submitted to an anxious, fretful, often despairing scrutiny. Even if some pass muster, some will always be found wanting. Nothing less than perfection will do. In men, good looks is a whole, something taken at a glance. It does not need to be confirmed by giving measurements of different regions of the body. Nobody encourages a man to dissect his appearance feature by feature. As for perfection, that is considered trivial, almost unmanly. Indeed, in the ideally good-looking man, a small imperfection or blemish is considered positively desirable. I accessed Amazon and hastily looked for things. I need to get rid of this hair, have a more even skin tone, use these peels to smooth my skin, get rid of these scars and be attractive. These requirements caused me to be careless with my purchases, and I found myself constantly looking for something new, a quick cure to turn my anxieties around and make myself confident. When do we become conscious of our bodies? It happened to me majorly when I was 24, entering graduate school. And while fears are personal battles to fight, I do blame the shift in circumstances a little. I watched everyone around me with polar skin, long limbs, and toned bodies, and it triggered something in me, a want to be like them. In our world, the youth is inextricably linked with business. If I wanted to look youthful for as long as possible, I needed to buy as many things as possible to help me maintain my youth. In my community, beauty was defined by two factors: symmetry and thinness. I never felt the need to overspend to make myself more beautiful because I believed I kind of had both of them. However, when I changed countries, I found myself in rougher waters. A toned muscular body, long legs, abs, little upturned nose, long delicious hair, long necks, thick but in the proper spots were all desired. All of these things undoubtedly took their toll on me, and I frequently found myself envious of everyone around me who possessed these qualities, and I became unwell from and for beauty. Even when I was alone in the house, I remember glancing in the mirror. I was doing my hair and makeup since that's what the it girl was doing. I convinced myself that I was doing it to feel better about myself by being more productive. I recall my mother calling me and telling me that she dislikes speaking to me when I'm not wearing makeup because she can't see how ugly I am. This caused me to become a self-surveyor, always checking to see whether I looked okay. I straightened my posture, puckered my lips, and imagined I was in a movie where people were staring at me while I just sat on my bed on my computer. Margaret Atwood, in her book The Robber Bride, writes, male fantasies. Is everything run by male fantasies? Up on a pedestal or down on your knees, it's all a male fantasy. That you're strong enough to take what they dish out, or else too weak to do anything about it. Even pretending you aren't catering to male fantasies is a male fantasy. Pretending you're unseen, pretending you have a life of your own, that you can wash your feet and comb your hair unconscious of the ever-present watcher peering through the keyhole in your own head, if nowhere else. You are a woman with a man inside watching a woman. You are your own voyeur. This beauty sickness had infected me so deeply that I felt I had to be beautiful all the time. I wished someone would invent makeup that could be worn while sleeping. I wanted to be beautiful even when I was asleep. I hurriedly searched for concealers for my legs, which had acne scars, for my back, which was covered in hyperpigmentation, for my arms, which had a rainbow of colors due to the sun. I'd stroll around my bedroom, continually checking the two mirrors to make sure everything was snug and secure. Even though I was aware of the inherent contradictions in my activities, I persisted on this road, telling myself that I was doing it for me and thus was not subject to any norms. Renee Englund writes in her book, Beauty Sick, she wonders if it's even possible to tell the difference between when you are trying to look good for yourself instead of doing so for others. The decomposition of the young girl. A boy grows up and becomes a man, while a girl grows up and decomposes into trash, an entity that no one wants. Loose skin, sagging breasts, cellulite, she invites terror, the dread of an older feminine body. A girl's life is decided by the calendar. Sontag writes, this is not to say that there are no beautiful older women, But the standard of beauty in a woman of any age is how far she retains or how she managed to simulate the appearance of youth. The exceptional woman in her 60s who's beautiful certainly owes a large debt to her genes. She further writes, an older woman is by definition sexually repulsive, unless in fact she doesn't look old at all. The body of an old woman, unlike that of an old man, is always understood as a body that can no longer be shown, offered, unveiled. At best, it may appear in costume. People still feel uneasy thinking about what they might see if her mask dropped, if she took off her clothes. Thus, the point for women of dressing up, applying makeup, dyeing their hair, going on crash diets, and getting facelifts is not just to be attractive. They are ways of defending themselves against a profound level of disapproval directed toward women, a disapproval that can take the form of aversion. The double standard about aging converts the life of women into an inexorable march toward a condition in which they are not just unattractive, but disgusting. The profoundest terror of a woman's life is the moment represented in a statue by Rodin called Old Age, the Old Courtesan, a naked old woman, seated pathetically, contemplates her flat, pendulous, ruined body. Aging in women is a process of becoming obscene sexually, for the flabby bosom, wrinkled neck, spotted hands, thinning white hair, wasteless torso, and vain legs of an old woman are felt to be obscene. Naomi Wolf writes in The Beauty Myth, perfectly summarizing the disgust that old women face. Whatever is deeply, essentially female, the life in a woman's expression, the feel of her flesh, the shape of her breasts, the transformations after childbirth of her skin is being reclassified as ugly, and ugliness as disease. These qualities are about an intensification of female power, which explains why they are being recast as a diminution of power. At least a third of woman's life is marked with aging. About a third of her body is made of fat. Both symbols are being transformed into operable condition so that women will only feel healthy if they are two-thirds of the women we could be. How can an ideal be about women if it's defined as how much of a female sexual characteristic does not exist on the woman's body, and how much of a female life does not show on her face? Modesty and veiling. Can we claim that modest fashion, as influenced by various religious traditions, can be subversive in light of all these Western notions of beauty, which build up an ideal feminine archetype and result in more consumerism on the part of women to fit the mold and become that archetype? Let us attempt to decipher that. Let us first examine why people choose to dress modestly. Many would tell you that modesty makes men focus more on your brain than on your body or on your beauty, and it makes them regard you as more respectable, as someone that they would choose not to harass, for example. I come from a place where most women subscribe to the Islamic faith and are quite modest in their clothes. On the surface, the above reading appears to make a lot of sense. You're not constantly concerned with how your body looks, if you're fully hairless, or any other Western ideals of beauty. But here are a few points to consider. First, the Western male gaze provides an archetype of womanhood that is in many ways opposed by the modest veiled woman. Nevertheless, when her modesty is attributed to gaining respect from men in her own society, is she not subscribing to the male gaze, but here a religious male gaze. Since beauty is so valued in the Western context, especially when we see beautiful women wielding so much power over many men, can we not say that if beauty is used in the West to gain power and social status, does modesty here not do the same thing? So, are we just upping our social status depending on where we live? These are some of the points that I do not have answers to, but I continue to think upon. So, does veiling in social circumstances where it's prevalent simply subscribe to another type of social currency? So, even if the veiled woman does not subscribe to the normate Western standards, that is, being ageless, being thin, being sexually appealing, being athletic, being able bodied, we have this one scholar called Eva Klepka, I hope I'm saying the name correctly, whose work argues that the hijab embodies a submission to the Islamic patriarchal imperative to not look appealing to men. This is another perspective that many would disagree with, claiming that veiling is not just an imperative to not look appealing to men, but it is an act of loyalty to God rather than looking appealing or not appealing to the men present in the society. Here, the comments from Mary Douglas become very important, who reads the body as a text, and it is a text that we can read only within a social context, that is where the body resides. So as a result, the body adopts whatever is socially acceptable in the worlds in which it resides. These thoughts frequently arise when we find ourselves in either of these situations. So if we are in a Western world where our social contexts are of a specific kind, our body as a text sort of appropriates to that, and vice versa. So, what Glepka's article contends is that individuals' relationships cannot be really conceptualized uh, through the dichotomy of that I'm veiling, so that's resistance against Western beauty norms, or I'm not veiling because I really don't want to appear quote unquote respectable to men. It isn't as simple as that, so we cannot really fit them into the dichotomy of resistance versus surrender. So rather than that, we have to see the ways in which the male gaze is negotiated, not in terms of being rejected completely or being complied with completely, but a more fruitful line of inquiry will always be to investigate how it's negotiated by women living in different social contexts. The ethics and aesthetics of veiling. Now, the question that arises is that if someone wears a veil in a Western country, so are they subverting the beauty values in some way? I think in some respects, refusing to conform to your surroundings and establishing for yourself a new image of womanhood that is often associated with positioning yourself as an outsider, making an appeal for this distinction does provide some relief from the Western beauty gaze. But here, another question arises. Do all women who wear the veil in Western settings or in different settings do it in a way that is distinct from the beauty trends that surround them? Is their veiling and their fashion completely separate from the Western gaze? Is the question that I'm trying to ask. I think I disagree with it because we have seen a kind of increase in modest fashion with bloggers, Instagrammers, fashion models, and others taking up all of these new trends that make up the normate and making them suitable in some ways for the veiled woman. So when we look at at stylish whaling, that I'll call it stylish whaling, we may say that it's a matter of mobilizing a specific visual regime, one that enacts its own aesthetics and ethics, rather than just subverting the gaze. So, the central problem that arises here is of veiling fashion practices and how they navigate the demand to be both beautiful and modest. In the fashion business, quiet luxury refers to a more subdued and subtle approach to luxury as opposed to overt displays of wealth or logo heavy branding. Rather than showy consumption, it frequently emphasizes quality, workmanship, and rare designs. With Sophia Richie's recent marriage and the appreciation for modest clothing that she wears and others like her are wearing, the quiet luxury aesthetic has become increasingly popular. What role does beauty play in it? The difference in attitude to modest fashion when it's religiously inclined versus when a wealthy influencer embraces it is very stark. This forces us to consider beauty's political implications. Many Muslim women, for example, believe that being modest means that they are close to their God, but they are thought of as backward and as having little control over their own life and as having been forced to dress in a certain way. However, when a wealthy, privileged individual leads a similar lifestyle, it is seen as elegant and stylish. So, this leads to another debate between religious modest fashion and quiet luxury as an aesthetic. Although we can argue that modest clothing definitely does not belong to any group, you don't have to be religiously inclined to wear modest clothes or vice versa, but we should be more aware and cognizant of how people respond to modest clothing when it's worn by different members of the social strata, and we have to consider the political implications of beauty. Can we ever escape the male gaze? Is subversion also subscription? The masculine gaze from the Western and Islamic worlds represents two different ways of looking at and interpreting women. In the Western setting, it is often said that objectification is frequently linked to the male gaze, where men frame women as objects of their desires and not as equal subjects. Famous feminist cinema theorist Laura Mulvey explored this idea when she emphasized how voyeuristic gaze perpetuated by mainstream media reduces women to passive and sexualized images for male consumption. As opposed to this, the term Islamic male gaze also alludes to Islamic teachings and instructions on how men should view women. It places a strong focus on respecting women, upholding their honor, and avoiding objectifying them. But it is not as simple because there are only some women who are considered respectable. Many women claim to feel respected when they wear the veil, but what about those who don't? What about people who don't believe in a modest ideal of womanhood or a modest ideal that's more Islamically inclined? As I consider my personal relationship with the concept of beauty, I am reminded of the strong influence that societal standards and cultural expectations may have on molding our opinions of ourselves and others. I was taught from a young age that beauty was the ultimate aim for women, and that acquiring this beauty needed ongoing effort and adherence to strict standards. This training caused me to continuously evaluate my appearance and seek validation from outside sources, which I'm sure is the story of a lot of women around me and those who aren't. As we have seen through this essay, we have just posed many questions that we haven't fully answered, and we have analyzed how beauty over time has had diverse interpretations. We see different philosophical perspectives that show this concept's complexities. Beauty has also been approached from a variety of lenses, from a Western understanding of beauty to an Eastern understanding. Within the Western, there are various nuances. Finally, what we have seen is that the journey through beauty politics has shown the power dynamics and societal influences that determine our perception of what is beautiful. Is beautiful the one that's desired, or is beautiful the one that is respected? The persistent pursuit of beauty, as well as the pressure to conform to restrictive beauty standards, can be harmful to many women's self-esteem and well-being. Similarly, stringent standards of modesty to ensure respectability can also affect somebody's mental and physical well-being. So it's critical when we are looking at these ideas to go into the nuances and intricacies, and to look at these varied notions of beauty and understand them properly. This is one of the only ways in which we can dismantle the complexes that we all hold.